AFR Talk. I'm Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point. The network is the American Family Radio Talk Network, AFR Talk. I'm glad to have you in the conversation today. Honored to have as an in-studio guest here at our Focal Point Studios, Ann Reed, wife of our producer, Jeff Reed, that went and got all those clips from Braveheart to start the program, talking about the guy on the island and all of that. And Ann is a contributor to the AFA Journal. I encourage you, if you don't subscribe, to go to afajournal.org. A lot of the past issues, I think all the past issues are online. I would encourage you to subscribe to this publication. Ann is a regular contributor to the pages of AFA Journal. And Ann, the reason I wanted to bring you on is to talk about the latest article that you wrote, which deals with a topic that's often not addressed when this issue is covered. You know, we talk frequently about the impact of abortion on women. In fact, Ann's gotten involved in a ministry called Surrender the Secret to help women recover from abortion. What we often do not talk about is the impact of abortion on men, and that's what Ann has written about, and I wanted to kind of walk her through some of the things that she discovered. Ann, welcome to Focal Point.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
Good to have you here. And Ann, let's talk about this for a second. It's something I even thought about when I read your piece. And that's something I don't even think about. I just don't think about the impact on men, but they're involved in abortions as well.
Well, I think part of the problem is that men try not to think about the impact on men. It's not something that's socially acceptable for men to accept that as something that should be bothersome to them.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the article, Ann, is that the suggestion that women have a different way of kind of responding or coping with abortion than men do. What's the difference that you see there?
Well, even with women, we process things amongst one another a little bit differently. But I'd have to say the common theme that I saw in every example, every situation, every scenario that I saw with regard to men was confusion. And that goes right along with what I just said, is that it's not socially acceptable. Men are taught that, in our culture that you're supposed to support your girlfriend or your wife, but you're not supposed to tell her what to do. You're not supposed to have any decision-making in the process. And so, as you know, and as I know, that God has created a man to be a protector and a provider. So, of course, not only of the love of his life, but also of the child that's in the womb. So you can imagine that it is very confusing for a man to be supporting his wife, and at the same time, it's his God-given instinct to also protect the child in the womb. So that was a commonality in every situation, but also the aftermath. The common theme was total loss of strength, of manhood, and a lot of times that is revealed in anger with men, more so than with women.
I want to cycle back to that, but it's an interesting thing that you suggest there that, and that's an angle it hadn't really occurred to me, but I think is very profound that, we know how God has designed men to be providers for their wives and their families and to be protectors for them, to provide an environment where they are sheltered, they're taken care of, their needs are provided for. And for a man to aid and abet in abortion, I'm not talking here about men whose wives or girlfriends have an abortion against their will, because that happens. We'll talk about that in a second. But for a man to participate in that, it's got to do some damage to his soul, because of the way God has designed his soul to be and the role that he's designed the man to play. So there's got to be some damage it does to his masculinity when that happens.
Exactly. One of the persons that I interviewed for this article is a gentleman who counsels post-abortive men, and he said, as far as from his perspective personally, he saw that, and he saw that as a result, he actually contributed to multiple abortions, and he said that for him, looking back on it, he recognizes that because of that abortion and how it affected him, that he basically gave up on life. I mean, he was still going through life, but he gave up on manhood, on the decisions that he's required to make as a man.
Well, and that's a striking part of your piece, Ann, about when a man doesn't properly process the abortion, come to terms with it, come to grips with it, deal with it in a way that is honest and kind of therapeutic, then all of that energy that's collected around that is sort of internalized,
Right.
and you're suggesting that can come out in some pretty destructive ways.
Right. That was, you asked what the main difference was, and I would have to say that was the main difference in the way that the consequences of that participation, and that participation can vary. There's many different scenarios in which a man can participate in an abortion. It can be from passivity to coercion. Sometimes a man is even affected if he finds out after the fact that his girlfriend or wife aborted his child. That still has a profound impact on a man. A man, the way that comes out with a man more so than with a woman is in anger.
So that can lead to aggressiveness, kind of control issues,
Right,
and
exactly.
So you just generally kind of our society could be affected by that, because you've got more of this kind of out of control aggression being expressed, and maybe even the guy does not even know where that impulse and that energy
That's right.
is coming from.
We see that with women as well. I lead post-abortion Bible studies, as you mentioned, and we see that once we start really going back into the depths and from the abortion experience and working forward, and we see, the post-traumatic stress, and we begin to realize how all of the ways, the negative qualities of ourselves, we see that so many of those things are actually attached to that experience. And in many ways, for many of us, we've actually just stuffed that down. That was post-abortive, and that's what I did, is I just stuffed it down and tried to deny it and tried to pretend that it didn't have any impact on me, but that doesn't stop the impact from actually being there and it coming out.
There's another angle
life.
that you touch on in this, and I have a personal friend who leads a pro-life organization in my home state of Idaho, and this was exactly his experience, where he was a big-time pro-death, pro-abortion advocate. He actually worked actively to defeat pro-life Republicans in the Idaho legislature. Then his wife got pregnant with his child. She wanted to abort the child, and he didn't. It was a son. He wanted the son. And she told him, hey, this isn't your call. Read your own stuff. This is a woman's choice. It's my body. I get to do with it whatever I want. You've got no say in this issue. Just read what you wrote. Listen to what you said. And that devastated him. I mean, that really rocked his world. So what happens to a guy when he's involved? He's just kind of aced out of having any role in the decision about whether that child draws its first breath.
Well, after the Roe v. Wade decision was made, there was actually 12 states, that's one of the things that's in the article here, that passed laws that gave, only if they were the husbands of the wives who were choosing abortion, the husband had to agree to it in order for her to be able to follow through with that abortion. But 3 years after Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court looked at that and they said, wait a minute, we can't do this. It's unconstitutional. And if you think about what that Roe v. Wade decision was based on in the first place, it wasn't based on the fact that a mother is killing her baby, but instead it was based on her right to privacy. So if you look at what that basis was, it makes sense that 3 years later, that's doing away with that whole idea of a woman having a right to privacy. So you see, if you look at what the actual basis was, they couldn't uphold those laws.
Well, and you look at God's design for the family, Anne, where the husband is designed to be the leader in his home, and his wife has been called by God to support him and honor him in that role, and therefore he's responsible to provide moral leadership in his home. And
Right.
Here the Supreme Court is saying, no, we're not going to honor that biblical pattern. In fact, we are going to make it unconstitutional for that biblical pattern to be honored in our public policy.
Right. And if you have a couple of minutes, I can even share from a personal perspective. I mean, I did a lot of research for this article in order to put these words on this paper, but I've also lived it out on a personal level. I had an abortion when I was 17, and I was the leader in the decision. And when I proposed the idea to who was my boyfriend at the time, he just kind of passively went along with it. And afterwards, we made a pact that we would never speak of it again. We never did. We were married for years, many years. I don't want to give away my age. And when it impacted both of us. It has to, as we've been saying.
Yeah, well, it's striking that you made a kind of a mutual silence pact. I mean, that would indicate that there was something very uncomfortable about this for both of you. He wasn't really comfortable with it. That's why he was agreed not to talk about it.
Right.
Again.
And we knew it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So years later, when our marriage fell apart and we were separated, and the Lord really began to work on me, and I began to experience conviction in a broad way. Obviously, I would. And as part of that process, the Lord also convicted me of my role as a woman that I played in that. And, we were separated at the time, and I called him in tears and just said, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what I did in stepping over you in that. Even though he took kind of a passive role, mm-hmm. I was so wrong in what I had done. And what I relayed to him as being the father. But he still at that time wasn't willing to face it.
Well, let's talk, and we've got just about 45 seconds left, and we can't go into detail, obviously, here. But very briefly, what can men do if they want to start moving toward dealing honestly with an abortion in their past?
Well, what I really want to say is firstly go to your pastor, but sometimes pastors just are ill-equipped. That's something that we hope to be able to, through this article and other articles, we hope to encourage pastors to become equipped to be able to serve those in their congregation. But sometimes you can go through a crisis pregnancy center. There are websites available. You can actually search. There's an online Bible study that's available that I have referenced in the article. It's called Missing Arrows. It's available at lifeissues.org. And there's another Bible study that's called Healing a Father's Heart. So there are different, maybe a local Christian counseling center and that type of thing. There are a number of different avenues available.
Well, and the good news, Ann, is according to the gospel, according to the scriptures, there is hope. There is a way forward. It begins with a man coming to terms with what he's done, being willing to acknowledge his responsibility and confess it, and God will take you from that point and work you to healing. Ann Reed has been my guest contributor to the AFA Journal. Go to afajournal.org to read this article. Highly recommend it. Ann, thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Focal Point AFR Talk, back in 2.